Regina, Downtown Bid, Warehouse District, and the Chamber of Commerce. It is part of an ongoing City Builders speaker series that many of you will be familiar with, and also kicks off the 2024 Saskatchewan Association of Architects Conference. A warm welcome to all the delegates for the conference, and a special welcome to our special guest for this evening. We have Nikki Anderson with us from the City of Regina, the City Manager. My name is Leanne Croft, and I'm an architect here in the city, and have been the chair of the Conference Planning Committee this year. We're thrilled to be able to tie these two events together in partnership with the City of Regina. And I hope many of you will be able to join us for the visioning workshop hosted by tonight's keynote on Saturday afternoon as well. I will now turn it over to Rory to officially open our conference.
Thank you, Leanne. Try and follow that up. My name, for those of you that don't know, is Rory Pitlick. I'm current president of the Saskatchewan Association of Architects. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here. It's an honor to be able to partner with the City of Regina and Regina Bids in the presentation that we're going to enjoy this evening. As Leanne said, this is the kickoff to our annual general meeting and annual festival. It's a wonderful opportunity to gather with my colleagues in the architectural profession. I like to think we're one of the most collegial collection of professional architects across Canada. The things that we share are very unique in a very unique climate, place, and community. We know well the importance of architecture and architectural design and the development and well-being of our communities. And I think that's a part of what we're going to celebrate over the course of this weekend. So on behalf of my colleagues, welcome. Welcome to all of you to the event that we're going to share in this weekend. I'm sure that we've got a wonderful program ahead of us, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight's presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. I'd now like to invite Judith Veresek with Regina Downtown Bid to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening.
Good evening. Thank you for braving the construction and joining us here tonight. As we like to say in the bid world, pardon our progress. We are making our community beautiful and more functional for our future generations. So tonight is the fourth talk in the City Building Speaker Series. This series is a partnership between Regina Downtown Business Improvement District, the Warehouse Business Improvement District, and the Regina and District Chamber of Commerce. Our previous speakers brought their thoughts and wisdom to our community. Folks like Tim Tompkins, who was head of the Town Square Business Improvement District in New York. We had Tom Mahler, who is the City Center Director for the City of Calgary. And our last speakers were out of Edmonton, talking about the Edmonton Public Library System. So it is a wonderful series that features speakers who have experience and insight into how cities can maintain and build vibrancy and prosperity by overcoming barriers to development. I am thrilled to introduce tonight's speaker, our fourth speaker, Jorick Beijer, who will share his European perspective on shaping mixed-use districts where people truly thrive. A born and raised urbanist, free spirit, and industry thought leader, Jorick is the voice of velocity. Having started design and development projects at just 20, Jorick's ventures in the built space since then have been driven by deep curiosity. Now, well-positioned in the nexus of the real estate universe, Jorick advises executives on how to make the most of new urban features. Jorick has been responsible for projects like the Active City strategy of Nike Incorporated, the global headquarters of Siemens Healthineers, and the campus of the Amsterdam Institute for Advanced Metropolitan Solutions. Currently, he is working on the EMEA headquarters of Nike Inc., the positioning of Dublin Town, and Innovation District Swedish in Amsterdam. It's my pleasure to introduce Jorick to the stage.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, thanks for joining us here tonight. I'm really honored to be speaking in this beautiful series that just has been presented and ahead of the conference that will be starting this weekend. Special thanks to Leanne and to Tyson in the back for bringing me over. It's really exciting to be here in Regina and getting to know much more of the fabric, and really looking forward to this talk, but even more so to what we'll be doing on Saturday, hopefully with many of you. I wanted to start with a small anecdote from the plane. I think I lost my voice somewhere on Calgary Airport, but I had a really nice chat with a gentleman next to me when we were taking off, and I told him I was an urban planner coming from Europe, and when we were flying out of Calgary and looking out the window, seeing all these endless, I thought that Hull was flat, but this is pretty flat as well. And the gentleman said to me, look at all the opportunity, and he was referring to opportunity to build more city in the countryside. So and Dutch are not well known for their diplomacy, but I tried to be very polite and explain my perspective on how to grow cities within cities and build and densifying, diversifying cities. And then we were talking a bit about Regina, and he told me, look, yeah, I get it. I just don't really have the reason to go into the city center. And I think, frankly, that's what we'll be speaking out tonight and in the coming days. I think we need to transition from necessity to desire and think about what we can do in our city centers, the stories that we can develop together to give people more desire to work in, live in, play in, work in our city centers. So frankly, that chat was actually a good warm-up for me to get into the topic tonight. We'll be talking about sticky cities, so shaping the places, the mixed-use environments where people can live, work, learn, play, and stay. And the idea of stickiness is very much at the core of our work at Velocity. How do we shape environments and experiences more so, where people feel the desire, and that what I was just referring to, the desire to be, and that reason to stick around for a longer period of time. The talk today is about humanizing city centers. So even though I know that the conference is very much about AI, technology, I want to talk about humans. And I found this really interesting, this chart of the Peloton stock, and how that developed during COVID. At some point, Nike wanted to buy Peloton because they really thought that the future of sport was in your living room, on a bike, and a computer screen in front of you. But you see how quickly that disappeared. That whole company dissolved. That stock value completely dissolved at the moment people could go out again and started to exercise again in ways that we're used to. Using the city as the playground for physical movement. And not only for sport, but also for just doing stuff like this, being on your bike, and making exercise and motion part of your daily system. It's not this deck, but I will show some photos on Saturday. It's easy to say, oh, look, you're Dutch, and these cities are full of cyclists. But 40 years ago, all these streets were full of cars. Okay? All these streets were parking lots. So this is the outcome of choice, and cities are the outcome of choice. So every city in the world can transition step by step into something like this, if you want it. So human, after all, nurturing connectivity in social central districts. I'm very passionate about cities, obviously, and doing a lot of work on campuses, business districts, and have been very much involved in trying to understand and speak in North American central business districts. And I know how complicated and what challenges there are in CBDs. And I think we need to get rid of that notion. Our city centers are no longer central business districts. Not only has the future of work changed radically over the past couple of years with hybrid work and all of that, but I think we also understand that our city centers are so much more and should be completely centered around social interaction between people in whatever kind of form and function. So I'll be showing some examples on that idea and try to expand how that might apply to Regina. So this is us, very much a boutique consultancy. We are with 4 people in a very compact team based out of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And yeah, you can say that we might punch a little bit above our wave with the work that we have been doing and that we're very proud of. And maybe that's not an apology, but if you came for beautiful design, I'm sorry, we do strategy mostly, strategy and stories. So we are not a design firm. We help our clients with strategic thinking, help them to understand cities and city culture, and indeed very much focus on mixed-use environments. We work with the likes of corporations like Philips, Nike, ABN AMRO, also very interested in university, higher education institutions, investors, but our clients are not really interested in great design, really interested in understanding cities on a more integrated level, and you'll see some more of that in a second. And after this slide I'll go to the real content, but we often work in that early phase of urban development, so in complex projects, before design, before the brief, we help our clients to define what these areas are really about, and unpack that a little bit with positioning and storytelling, and I'll deep dive on that in a minute, visioning and concepts, business cases, and coalition building. Very much a hands-on approach, not only coming up with a story and a concept, but also helping very early on in the process, not thinking of a business case after the project is built, or thinking of operational models after an area has been gone live, but building that business case and the coalition to support that story very early on. And I'll show an example out of Amsterdam in this presentation. We started Velocity 12 years ago, and from an initial spark that I had with a health scientist. So I founded Velocity together with Marije, who studied sociology, has a PhD in health sciences. I'm an urban planner by training, studied in Delft, in the Netherlands and in Los Angeles. And we really wanted to work on that intersection between human behavior and the built environment. But with much more knowledge about how the environment is really shaping our behavior. Because how much I love architects, and I have many friends in architecture, there's still a lot of naivety about what actually are the indicators and the parameters that influence our behavior. In our work, as I mentioned before, that notion of stickiness and sticky cities became throughout the years quite a dominant concept. And we curate our work around that notion with clients that are looking to really develop humanized approaches to get communities in touch with areas, with investors that are very keen to make social impact, that have ESG high on their agenda, and in particular the S, the social value in project and the money they put to work, and increasingly after COVID, after the pandemic, with corporations and with universities that want to make a push and really get more out of that war for talent. And so that's been how we were structuring our work around that concept. And for every case, for every concept, I have an example. Before we do that, I want to zoom out a little bit more, and just in 5 slides, share some higher level concepts, trends, if you will, that kind of frame that body of work. I think what is interesting, and you're aware, of course, how quickly the middle class is growing across the world, and how that is changing gravity points in how we globally understand the future of cities, of investment, and of culture. So huge shifts in how we see the middle class developing, but also because of that, talent moving around. So that growth of the middle class is the big catalyst of talent going to different regions of the world for education and for work. So this growth is pushing an enormous mobility among that younger generation. And that is driving what you could call spiky cities. And this is a European image, but that would also apply on a global scale. And that growth of the middle class, that increased mobility, is driving urban patterns like this. And so we're no longer in discourse that's structured around nations, but very much about cities and city-states. And you see very clear what cities are winning that war for talent and for investment. So a world of very spiky, competitive cities that all are looking for that same discerning talent. And that is, of course, it has its pros and it really has its cons. A global housing crisis where I think if we would have updated this a little bit further, the chart would go out of the screen. But an incredible global housing crisis, and not only in cities, and that is expanding and sprawling out across these regions on a regional level. And this is, of course, a big concern for cities that have always had compact footprints, in particular in European context, for example. What is interesting, and as a fourth concept, is that if you then look at that changing mobility, that pressure on the housing market, that you also see that living, working, learning patterns, if you look at it more from a behavioral point of view, are no longer linear. It's no longer necessarily the case that you go into college, you graduate, you land a job, buy a house, etc., etc. These pathways, these patterns are, instead of linear, in particular in cities, are becoming much more of a Jenga kind of thing. And so you have a startup in college, you rent a house close to uni, and you continue that journey in a much more dynamic and a non-linear way, frankly. And this is, of course, pushing and I think requiring us to think of new urban typologies, not only on a building scale, but also really on a district scale. And then last but certainly not least, there is that other pandemic. So if we think in all these steps after each other, growth in middle class, increased mobility, housing crisis, and that footloose generation is looking for is wanting to live in different ways, seeking purpose, then we also see really concerning stats about mental health across the globe. And that is an urban condition. And that is a condition that we need to address when we think about central social districts. We have to be super careful about how we think of the environments and experiences that these generations are living, working, and learning in. And this is something that it would be naive to say that you can fix this. By no means. These are very complex biophysical elements, but our built environment and our access to services, our access to property, all contribute to that bigger picture. So that's sort of a scan of just 5 curated trends that all influence, I think, our practice and our policies. I want to deep dive into 3 different projects that we are and have been working on. Just to unpack a little bit how that idea of positioning, programming, and partnership building, how that sort of plays out in different ways, with a bit more depth. Starting with the Nike European headquarters, based just out of Amsterdam. We have been working with Nike as their strategic advisor on cities and on campus development. A service that many corporations don't really have in-house. Huge corporate real estate departments, big facility management teams, but very little capacity to think about cities and urbanization. Whereas if you think of it, all their clients, all their consumers, their entire community lives in cities. Their campuses are increasingly part of cities. And we've been helping Nike to re-envision their campus in the Netherlands, their European headquarters. And that's not all of it. This is a future, this is a rendering of a future scenario that we're building towards. But that campus is somewhere in the middle of the picture with 3,500 to 4,000 employees, 70% international, non-Dutch, 10 different buildings, on what is nowadays a very monofunctional business park. So this is a 9-to-5 dull, it's surrounded by attractive neighborhoods, but a very dull business park. And I'll show you how we're trying to step by step try transform that into a much more 24/7 mixed-use environment with a real buzz, structured not only around work, but very much so education and living. So the good thing is that that campus is already there, and that has been there for a couple of years, almost 25, frankly, but in a very particular context. And together with the city, the local community, we have been working on a positioning to really start targeting this not as Nike's European headquarters, but as the Dutch capital of sport and innovation. So we've started building an ecosystem before starting to build buildings. We started to build an ecosystem of partners that all contribute to that story of sport and innovation, to that journey that we want to go on together on creating the most healthy neighborhood in the Netherlands, where we're partnering with the city to put a public pool, a public sports hall, an international primary school, and 1,000 units of residential plus 100,000 square meters, roughly, of commercial functions all around that campus. So we're really embracing that headquarters with a complete neighborhood in a very modern way. And the good thing is that we can build on what's already there. So this skate park is already there. It's an incredibly popular skate park on the Nike campus, and you will see kids on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays take the train from Amsterdam, go there to skate, and there's no swoosh on the skate park. It is Nike, it's owned by Nike, it's operated by Nike, but it's one of the most authentic places for these kids to be. And I think that is one of the sort of strong points in this project, that we're very conscious about branding and role of brand. Just to walk you through in 5 steps through what we've been doing high level. So in dark blue you'll see the different buildings that Nike is occupying, all rent, all lease. And the interesting thing is that Nike has a very strict policy of not owning assets outside of the US, with the idea to always be flexible and able to relocate if necessary. However, they do own all the land you'll see on the left of the image. That popped up as an opportunity years ago, and they bought it just to be sure. The stock is not doing really well, but there was some pocket money left to buy up that land. So we've been working with all that land that you see on the left, in between the campus and the rail between Utrecht and Amsterdam, to really start to add programming to that campus. We're working with the Dutch Railways to lobby for changing the train station that is currently right here to here. So all the program that you see on the left is new program that includes the pool, that's the school, the sports hall. But moving the train station will help us to build this east-west corridor and pedestrian boulevard across that new area, which then no longer a campus. That's a mixed-use innovation district. On that boulevard, creating 3 distinct privately owned but public spaces. On the station square, the midfield in the core of the campus, and this is where the skate park already is. So leveraging privately owned land for public use. And frankly, a lot of the sport facilities in this new neighborhood are owned by Nike. And I know that that's for North American cities not really a radical concept. For Europe it is. There isn't so much privately owned public space. And so we're really developing a new public-private partnership model here on this campus. Quite unique for the Dutch landscape. And then I think what is interesting, transforming that core of the Nike campus into a fluid landscape, where already ground floors of these buildings have been made much more transparent and open, so you can go from the sport facility right here to the core of that midfield, even if you're not a Nike employee. And these ground floors, security has been lifted up, are accessible. You can land there to work or to study if you're on the school over here. So the whole core of that area is becoming a completely fluid landscape in and out of the buildings. And then as a last step, and that's almost the most complicated one, and we're working on models to enable access for the community to all the outdoor sport facilities. Skate park has been purposely designed to do that, but there are other sport facilities that are closer to the buildings, where you can imagine with a stock-listed American company, you have to go through a couple of loops to get that done. But we're increasingly providing access to the community to leverage the sport facilities and create an operating company with partners and with the new development owners, with the owners of the land has been sold, to create a strong operating company to also make sure that there is a long-term budget to operate and to improve these facilities continuously. So really blending that private and public on many different layers. And in the end, I think it will take a good, I know how slow Dutch politics is, it will take a good 8 to 9 years until that train station is moved. But then hopefully we're working towards a scenario that looks something like this, which would be a radical improvement if you would see the area right now. That is all sort of high-level planning, and that is business cases, that is a lot of leadership socialization, that is contracts between the city and the business. But then there's a lot of meanwhile work that is happening at the same time, because as I mentioned, the campus is there, the community is living around it, and we're not working on a paper plan. So what I want to show is a couple of examples how we're involving the community, how we're engaging with the residents that live in the surrounding neighborhoods, and how we're building the story. So I spoke before about that idea of the capital of sport innovation, and very early on in the process, we decided together with the city to rename that area from Arena Park into Sport Park. This is where you'll have the Olympic Village of the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics. And so this area has deep heritage in sport, and we've been building a brand, made a new logo, the whole shebang, to start telling a different story about this area. And combine that with the intervention, and we are doing that on policy pieces, so the urban plan that has been approved in council is in that new identity, is speaking about that positioning. This is a partnership contract signed by the city and Nike in that layout. So even to a super tactile, granular level, keep on repeating that story, building that narrative, expanding that narrative, and also making that happen in reality. So this is zoomed out where that area is that we're just talking about, and this is a beautiful protected header. For us, this is pretty big. This is sort of a 5K loop, and that is a lot of nature for the center of the Netherlands. And we, together with the nature reservoir, with the city, really developed 2 running routes on that header in that identity. So again, very small interventions, just making trails on a header that's already there, of course, has been there for years, but step by step, quite literally, involving the community on that journey, and yeah, really driving a lot of energy, momentum, and we've just opened a new boot camp box, a workout environment, open to the public again. The skate park was already there, so there's a whole journey of interventions and activations that we have planned for the coming years. As this, of course, is a long-term game. This whole development will take a good 10 years. So really focused on how to activate that experience before that environment is already there, because we haven't broken ground on any of the program. And that is what we're working on. My next case is again from Amsterdam, and I would have loved to show you some of our international work, but I think this helps to structure that concept of sticky cities from 3 different angles. And this is much more strategic. So this is further out. This is And this is earlier on in that process of definition where we like to work. This is a new innovation district on the south side of Amsterdam that was decided to be an innovation district by the city. So all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, very nice campus for the University of Amsterdam, a top medical hospital. And then all of a sudden there was a policy brief from the city of Amsterdam listing 8 innovation districts. And all of a sudden this area where there were campus master plans in place, there were partnerships in place, all of a sudden became an innovation district. That was sort of an umbrella concept that had no real meaning, there was no content to support that idea of an innovation district. So we kind of reverse engineered what that could mean and how that could be started. Sometimes it's not bad to have politicians that are a little bit disconnected from reality. That also leads to interesting projects. We've been helping in a joint commission for the Free University of Amsterdam, the Amsterdam University Medical Center, and the City of Amsterdam. A somewhat consistent approach to the positioning, the programming, and the placemaking, mostly for this, what you then could call an emerging innovation district. Targeted very sharply on human health and life science. So this is what we're looking at. Amsterdam, with the city center on top, has an overall strategy to create a second center for the city. The pressure on the historic canal zone is so big that they're working on a more polycentric model to distribute tourism, but also new residential neighborhoods across the city and create more nodes that are really attractive and meaningful. And the key one is Amsterdam South. Not only because there's some space there, not a lot, but also because of the connectivity to Schiphol Airport on the left and a really good direct metro and train connection. And what is interesting is that Amsterdam South was kind of invented as a concept and place in the 1990s. Before, there wasn't really much there. And has been growing very quickly into a leading central business district. This was, I was talking before about that monofunctional idea of business district. This is one. This, for a long time, had a Canopy Wharf, Paris La Défense vibe to it, very strongly focused on business, led by ABN AMRO Bank, very monofunctional. And this is through leadership of the city before, or sort of right after the financial crisis in 2009, the city started to push more residential program towards that business district. And that was very much focused on the direct core around the Amsterdam South Central Station. As a reference, it has an every 8-minute connection to Schiphol Airport. And so if you work here, this is where a lot of Dutch corporates or international corporates or post-box corporates from other countries that are looking for tax havens, unfortunately have their offices. They can be at the airport in 13 or 14 minutes by train. So super well connected. But until that moment, 5 years ago, very monofunctional. We had that in place, that strong, very strong, consolidated free university, and that's a top 200 global university with the UMC, the University Medical Center. The light volumes here didn't exist for a long time, so it was sort of a disconnected central business district and a university campus. And the city has been developing the whole area, and this is all work in progress. But the interesting thing is that there's a huge opportunity to develop this campus XXL and this extra large campus into that innovation district South X, where it's no longer just a university, but a much more diverse and rich mix of work, of co-working, of entrepreneurship, and a lot of young professional living and student accommodation. As many cities in the world, also Amsterdam really lacks proper purpose-built student accommodation. And so that's what we're doing here, trying to understand how that somewhat top-down concept of an innovation district that was projected on that area could become a reality with the right partnership and coalition in place. So what we did, we spent a lot of time organizing sessions, and I wanted to show that, not because I wanted to show that this is my favorite jacket, and you'll see there's some more photos. But we organized a lot of sessions, and this is what, for me, is very much at the core of our work, and I think, frankly, should be at the core of all our work, is to have that interaction. And I don't believe in urbanism as paper plans. Of course, lovely to do a good research and a nice analysis, but I think that I really believe that the impact that we're making is through the connection and the dialogue. So we've organized a lot of sessions where the beauty was that this is quite a well-known professor specialized in cancer. For a couple of years, for 2 years, the innovation concept was handled by the director of real estate at the university, by the chief city planner for the city of Amsterdam, and the facility manager of the university hospital. So building out an innovation district on human health and life sciences was handled by 3 guys, professional experts in real estate. And we started to sort of unpack that and start to invite academics, caretakers, people from the hospital, to really build on a much more content-driven and a much more embedded story on what the innovation district could look like, and trying to give that much more, and that was sometimes also tough, and trying to also jump between these different skills, between these different interests, trying to work directly with the professors and the tutors to see how we could, for example, for next semester, build programs in their curricula where students could support placemaking. So instead of that sort of vague top-down approach and that word, trying to really land on, again, very fine-grained interaction with the people that are actually working, actually giving meaning to that concept, and to make it very, very practical and actionable. So, and together with these people, a lot of co-design sessions, or I should say futuring sessions, because not about the design of these public spaces or these buildings, where most of them were already there, but just to sketch with them how these different angles could look like. How did they think of activating streetscapes? What kind of sort of vibe, what kind of energy do they want to see back in these spaces? How do we also build the material for them to discuss that with the city? So that was in a way quite beautiful, that the city allowed us, in partnership with the other clients, also to build the material that the community professionals could use to advocate sort of back to the city. And I think that sort of idea of local democracy is quite strong. And these kind of images have no intent to be a design or whatsoever, but they are they've been very useful as conversation pieces. And in the end, it helps, and I'm sure you agree, that it helps to sketch out, to draw, or to model how these different futures could look like, and make it more of a reality than words can ever be. In the end, it's also about then stuff like this. And so, also, and this is in Dutch, apologies, but I took it from the report, also building these coalitions, identifying the people that are actually able to give meaning to the innovation district, and structure that around different topics, around different themes, and being very sharp about, okay, if you want to move forward, and we have these strategies to work on programming, to work on placemaking, and these are the people that are able to work with us, with you, city, to also give that substance. So from super high level to very actionable, and this continued, and we got a follow-up assignment to start building out some of these programs, and I think that's, to be honest, the only way to do it, bottom up. Of course, and there's also a campus master plan done by the university, there's also an urban planning framework from the city, but there's also this bottom-up development of programs and place-making initiatives that are anchored in these people that are there. And I think that's how we really would like to structure more of our work, because that's driving in the end the real impact that these people are. The third, speaking about people, the third and final example that I want to discuss, and I'll do the name once, is the Amsterdam Institute for Advanced Metropolitan Solutions. Very cleverly shortened to AMS Institute, but the AMS is not only for Amsterdam. If you talk about people and about building capacity in the city government, this is a very clever project that the city of Amsterdam did 10 years ago. And I'll explain why. 10 years ago, the city of Amsterdam sold, you're familiar with gas and national resource and that kind of resources, but the city of Amsterdam sold its stock in the national gas company. And that gave every deputy mayor 50 million euros to spend on a project. Well, that's of course nice. So a taxi, an e-mobility program was rolled out by one deputy mayor. There was some work on a library, and this particular deputy mayor, Caroline Gerels, developed a strategy on how to reinforce the labor market of Amsterdam, and through that idea reinforce also the capacity of the city itself to solve its own problems. So what they did was they released a design contest, a kind of an RFP, but in a more creative way, for a new university. Amsterdam already had and has had for a long time 2 very strong classical universities, but missed back then that more technological, engineering-driven perspective on an academic level. And I'm from Rotterdam, so I mean we always joke about the arrogance that Amsterdam and people in Amsterdam have, because there's a really strong technical university in Delft and in Eindhoven, but were quite keen to do it themselves. And in the end, that proved really successful, I have to say. What they did, released an international competition for a new university. And that was won by Delft University, by Wageningen, so 2 leading Dutch universities, and MIT. And the 3 of them opened up a branch campus, a new university, or an institute in the city center of Amsterdam 10 years ago. And what is interesting is that we were involved in 2014 and 15 to help them land their campus in Amsterdam, to do all the, again, quite sort of practical, actionable work in working on the story of that institute. And the tender, all of a sudden that RFP was won, there was a model of the city contributing 50 million euros over 10 years time, so 5 million every year, to build up the infrastructure of the institute, and with a clever model of other partners chipping in money. I'll come to that in the next slide. But from partnership development to positioning, and also to, frankly, to finding the right place for the institute to have impact in the urban fabric of Amsterdam. So, and 10 years later, we're celebrating on June 6, 10 years of AMS Institute. And they came back to Velocity to make a playbook on the lessons learned of 10 years Innovation Institute building. So we went back to the original bid, we interviewed people that have worked on the Institute for 10 years, and we kind of distilled 7 building blocks on how to build innovation institutes in cities in this manner. And I'll just walk you through some of these key concepts. So what is interesting about AMS Institute was that analysis that engineers were missing in the labor force of Amsterdam, and that there is a disconnect between the complex urban challenges that we have. And I don't need to I'm not going into that much, but there are so many complex and wicked problems in our cities. Think of traffic, think of waste, think of circularity, think of energy. I mean, I can go on about the complex and the interrelated socio-physical problems that we have to solve in our cities. And then the academic excellence that is very much structured still in siloed disciplines. So you have great architects, you have great mobility engineers, you have great theoretical physicists, but the universities, at least in Europe, are in that sense quite siloed. So how do you connect that academic excellence with these complex, double complex urban challenges? That's where AMS Institute is sort of a transitional piece, and we worked on this Lego language that appeared at some point and kind of worked where there's an interface between these complex challenges and that academic excellence. So an institute that connects the challenges from the city of Amsterdam to the resources in Delft, Wageningen, and MIT. So you can see the institute almost as a broker between these two different worlds. And then structured around education. So there's now a full master's on metropolitan engineering and design. There's a 250 million euro research and innovation program with top academic research on these questions. And there's an entrepreneurship track. So that institute became a very interconnected but also independent institute for the city of Amsterdam, a really important resource in their journey of solving some of these challenges that they have. What we did in the research for the playbook was to, as I mentioned, compare the initial bid with the current status quo and try to also describe how that evolved over the years. And what is interesting that, for example, to mention is that partnership model. So the city of Amsterdam offered 50 million, but demanded a multiplier of 200 million. So there was a 1:4 ratio where the city would provide 50 million euros of funding if the three partners would collect together over 10 years 200 million. And they did. In the end, they got more than that. Through research funding, through assigned research, through education, of course. And what is interesting that institute started off was envisioned as a very close-knit, 3 universities, a city, and 10 partners that would each just chip in, top-down, 20 million euros, and making up for the 200 in total. And that completely failed. Shell considered putting 20 million in for a couple of months, in the end backed out, and they had to go from that top-down central model to a completely dispersed model of partnerships around projects. And in the end they got more, because the content became leading, the challenges were much more relatable, much more partners could be involved. So on A, from a very close and narrow, upfront defined model to a much more of an ecosystem where the partnerships were clustered around projects. That also meant, for example, in B, that instead of 2 program developers, there are now 12. So that dispersed model asks more from the team. Again, making that 5 million annual contribution to the city super important as a basic framework for these projects to develop. The way it was thought about data collection completely changed. The pathway to entrepreneurship was envisioned as a student goes into research, goes into entrepreneurship, became completely inside out, outside in, startups, joining the institute in many different ways. So overall you could say that the institute from top down, consolidated and compact became much more of a platform open to all kinds of very permeable connections with partners. And I think key in that transition is that multiplier model where the original idea was that the input in white, 200 from the market, 50 from the city as input with no definition of the output, transitioned and is transitioning, to be honest, into a model where the impact is measured as a multiplier on the input, which I think is very strong. I want to just show very quickly 2 or 3 concepts that I think are key out of these 7 building blocks. So, firstly, true partnership. This started as an RFP where the city put out a bid of an offer of 50 million euros, and AMS Institute won. And for the first couple of years was the client of the city. There was a sort of contractual relation between the funder and that new emerging institute, which started very, very small. When we were working on the first campus, that core team was literally 4 people. Of course, with research, with a lot of resources, human capital, if you will, in the mother institutes, but as a core, very small. That partnership model really shifted to a much more trusted, true partnership with the city, where you see on the left Evelien, the academic director of the institute, in the center, the mayor of Amsterdam, and right, the chief technology officer of the city, which from a pure funding contractual relationship, a much more content-driven relationship emerged around the real challenges the city has. And that sounds sort of logical, but was really not envisioned in that original bid, because it requires a lot of openness from the city to be able to share the deep concerns about the quality of the K-walls in that city center. And that's not information that you so easily share with partners. And what is interesting, that now evolved into a model where the institute is also sometimes the broker in between the city government and market parties. And so it's almost an intermediate step that is completely trusted in that ecosystem. So in a way, the city, you could say, spent a lot of money on a new institute, but also spent not so much money on a very trusted consulting capability that they would otherwise hire every year. The institute has a completely independent governance model. The playbook is out June 6th, and it will be online. So I'll make sure if you follow on LinkedIn, it's all public. Also because of the public nature of the institute. That playbook, I think, has a lot of interesting insights, and it will be shared. The other element that I want to very quickly share is the notion of place. This institute doesn't just need a campus building or a facility. What is interesting about that independent institute between 3 universities and the city, that all of a sudden AMS Institute became a sort of a safe haven for researchers and for people working in the government. So what you'll see here, the behavior that you observe now on the former naval area in the city center of Amsterdam, super central, is that it's becoming a bit of a third place in between the city offices and the universities, where these people meet, interact, and a lot of serendipity can develop itself. So instead of a campus, much more of a clubhouse. It's a very sort of cozy, messy in a nice way kind of vibe, very informal, and almost sort of an independent, sort of neutral environment for people to share their concerns and work together. And I think that's one of the unexpected powers, that in particular the universities at first, they were of course interested in launching a new prestigious institute in Amsterdam, but were very reliant and focused on their existing campuses in Delft and in Wageningen. But you see that now, that for these principal investigators, for the researchers, this independent sort of third place is becoming a very attractive environment to catalyze new projects, to build new partnerships in ways they never could back in their home universities. And what is so strong about the institute and its location now is that a lot of the stuff that's being studied is super applied. And so they're studying autonomous boats for the canals on Amsterdam. They're studying K-wall interventions for the canals of Amsterdam. They're working on circular waste. And that's all happening on and around that campus. So stuff that you could never do, or not by no means so interesting and applied back in the campus, in the labs that are existent, can all, in living labs, be tested and prototyped in the actual city with the actual community. That's putting a complete different layer of impact on top of that scientific rigor. I think what is key in the end, and that's what I'm wrapping up with on AMS, is this is a lot of learning by doing. So this is a journey of 10 years of learning. There's a playbook now, but I think you can write many playbooks on building institutes like this, because there's no one way. They do get a lot of questions from cities across the world and to share their lessons learned, their experiences, because obviously for a lot of cities and universities it's interesting to find that new crossover model where applied academic insight is directly connected to actual challenges. But in many ways, this is learning by doing. I mentioned the living lab way of working, so all the research in AMS Institute is applied. It's academic, but also applied in the city. And that, as I mentioned, that puts a whole new layer of complexity on that research and makes the impact much richer. But there's also a lot of learning by doing for the city itself, and that's where I wanted to start wrapping up. One of the unexpected, because this all started, as I mentioned, with the purpose of adding engineers to the labor market of Amsterdam, making the labor market more robust for another financial crisis. Amsterdam always had in the Netherlands, has a very dominant services economy. And so from initially focusing on just diverting from that model into more applied engineering, what happened was that the city got, instead of a very expensive institute, got a pretty inexpensive resource to learn with, to build capacity among the people working for the city government. So for a lot of civil servants, they all of a sudden got a local sparring partner. They got local stakeholders with academic expertise to collaborate on the challenges that they were confronted with. Not directly exposing themselves to the market and to consultants, but having that in-between step of trusted academic resources that have much more of a neutral position, but also able to critically reflect on processes that, as written here, the city would not really seek advice for with consultants. And so you build a whole layer of intelligence quite close to the core of your organization as a city government. And that really has helped to, and I think you're all aware of the work, for example, of Mariana Mazzacuto out of University College London, who writes about the concerns arising from cities leaning so heavily on consultants, hollowing out the ability for cities themselves to answer the real questions. Well, institutes like this help also to educate and to build capacity among civil servants. Still costs some money, but it's a way also to I would say, drive a new wave of emancipation for civil servants and to move closer back to the real challenges that city have that are not just solved in policy papers, but need hands-on application in the city itself. I want to wrap up this work and the role of corporations and brands in city making. And I think we can do much more, and I'm very aware of the concerns about brands in public space and about the nuances that we need to develop. But I think there is untapped potential in working with brands to build new narratives, new experiences in our cities. In particular, brands and corporations that are also concerned about where they're sourcing the talent from, where their talent is living, how their talent is coming to work. Secondly, the role of higher education institutions and post-secondaries. I know that's for Regina, but that's one of the questions. How do we bring talent back to the city center? How do we weave a new generation of talent back into the fabric of our downtown? And thirdly, how do you engage with community? How do you build these narratives? How do you start driving the programs, stories first and ahead of the real estate? I think the future of the cities is much more of a storytelling exercise than is a zoning exercise, frankly. And I think we need to, and we will on Saturday, dive much deeper in these new futures on our cities and the stories that will help to unlock budgets, to unlock partnerships, and then ultimately also unlock the zoning and regulations that we need to make it happen. There are 3 quick takeaways that I want to share with you. And I think altogether, and this is also a note to self, I think all the time, I think we have to remind ourselves that we should stop settle for the status quo. And there's no reason, there's literally no reason to keep on doing things like we always did. I think there is so much we can learn if we're open to it. And our cities need us now. We need to address the urgent challenges that our cities are facing. There's no way we can move away from that. I think the power is to start shaping the spaces in between our buildings. I think we, and I don't mean the parking lots, I also do mean parking lots in between the buildings. But I think there is so much, literally and also conceptually, so much space in between the buildings. And that is where the experience of our city really is. So good architecture and good facades are key. But there's so much more in that fabric in between that really drives the stickiness of our cities. And ultimately, it is really about the experience on top of the environment. And I think it's very tempting as designers, and I still consider, because of my training myself as a designer at heart, it's very tempting to think about place and about environments, but it's that layer of activation on top of it, that experience, that really makes the cities a place of desire. I hope we continue this conversation on Saturday and keep telling each other these provocative, engaging stories about the future of our cities. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Very inspirational. I think a lot of key takeaways. I think where you started off with, cities are about choice. It's the choices we make every day that lead to where we will be in the future. And that ability of storytelling to tell the stories and to start activating those stories now to become the places we want to be. So fantastic. Do you want to do a Q&A at all now?
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, fire.
So I don't know if there's anyone from the audience that would like to ask a question. Is Jorick here? If not, that's okay. Oh, lots of questions. All right. Why don't we start at the front here?
So during the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about spiky cities, and so people having choice to move around. And I guess what I'm getting at is cities face very similar problems. How much are cities trying to differentiate from each other, or do they all have very similar problems, or needs, or strategies?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. I agree with the notion that competitiveness. So these cities are, and that picture was only showing European cities. These cities are incredibly competitive, and in particular for talent, and for the younger generation. And I don't think, frankly, that they do enough to position themselves in different ways. And of course, I think positioning of a city has multiple layers. In our work, we see more on a district level. If you see, if you talk about an innovation district or about a particular touristic area, as was mentioned before, we're working on Dublin town at the city center of Dublin. That is also looking for a unique edge. And I think every city has that edge. I think in a much more globalized digital world, I think we need to articulate these different qualities better. But I think that's a huge opportunity. I think that there's a long way to go to really expand and also to integrate these stories better in the urban fabric of these cities. But on the other side, what you still see is that people are, for many other reasons, flock into these different cities. Also for things like cost of living, for example, accessibility of housing. In Lisbon, in Europe, we see Lisbon, for example, because of fixation as a very attractive destination for tech startups. And so there's not only, I'm getting at, it's not only that sometimes a cultural or spatial edge, it can also be all sorts of policies and incentives that give cities a certain character.
go, I guess, from front to back.
You talked about trust as a critical sort of feature. Is it something you measure, look at, study formally when you talk institutional trust or trust among cities? I work in social infrastructure questions, so
Yeah.
I'm just curious if it's a notional idea or if you actually focus on the role of trust, whether it's changing, getting better or worse.
Yeah. We've never studied it in a sort of qualitative way. We do see on a more anecdotal level that all these conversations, as in the Amsterdam Innovation District example, having all these conversations, building these relationships in the end leads to trust and making the partnership much more meaningful. So I would say it's a key component of a lot of that. Yeah, that's quite intense body of work in these projects. So far, we've never measured. That would be, but maybe that's a follow-up. Quite interested also to understand if you have some tools on how to measure trust.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'm saying just, to make the, now in Rijal downtown, we have some problems. So we have regional problems, we have also parking problems. So what do you think to make Rijal attractive city? And some people would say that they would make it a daytime city, in the daytime.
To make it a daytime city.
A lot of people in the daytime, but in the evening we make it silent. But some people want to say that they want to, in the daytime is active, in the nighttime is also active. So I would like your comments on that. And also, when we look at the projects, we have to evaluate the circumstances and the future impacts. So for example, when we try to look at the macro evaluation, and then we have to consider. So, for example, now we have the cars moving gas. I mean, later on we have cars moving maybe electric cars, with electric power generating. So what do we have to bear in mind when we design some projects, some strategies?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that Regina Downtown has a parking problem. I think there's a problem in mobility behavior. Okay? So I've seen all the surface parking in downtown, and I think there's not, I think we, yeah, I'm not sure if that's pro or boo, but, so I think one of the things to really unlock is mobility behavior. I think the parking is, I think all the surface parking, and bear with me, I landed last night, so I just had one day in Regina downtown. But I think there are voids in the city center, and that expansion, and it's so attractive. I see that also in Europe, even though the scale is somewhat different, but the ease in which you can expand the city into a very valuable agricultural land. I think we should flip the paradigm and really start filling the voids in the city center, using some of these parking lots to build more program in the city. So I think densification is key. And I'm talking not about skyscrapers, but there's a very interesting optimum of 7 to 8, 9 levels of stories that would really help to bring a bit more density and a bit more population in the city center, which I think also calls for more diversity in the build program. So I think steering away from what I saw, at least in the very central city, as being dominantly office and commercial, to much more residential. So I think rebalancing that program in the core is key. Which also add to your point of that 24/7 versus 9 to 5 will also help to get some more eyes on the street after 5 p.m. So I think getting a more healthy balance in what kind of program you have in the city will really help also to drive the viability of other stores, of stores, of leisure. And so in the end, I think, or in general, I'm a huge believer of residential in city cores. What I think will help to unlock that, because then of course you could say, yeah, well, but it's not a very attractive place to be, and you want to live downtown. I think one of the elements that we could look into, and I hope we will on Saturday, is the role of higher education. I think there is really potential to think of a post-secondary or maybe a branch campus of the university to start placemaking in the city center, drive a new audience. If you think of the AMS Institute example, maybe collaborate and work, have students and researchers collaborate and work on some of the challenges in that city center. And so I think it's a whole myriad of solutions that we need to consider. And in the end, we can also not make everyone happy. But I think we know what's good for the future of our cities. And we know that even cars shifting from gas to EV, they're still cars. And we don't need more cars in our city centers. We have built cities everywhere in the world. And I think, frankly, way too long focused on car mobility. And I think we need to re-engineer that back into a much more human scale and allow people to walk, to maybe take a bicycle, and somewhat maybe use a streetcar to, in the far future, maybe connect different hubs. And so I think it's a whole chain of elements that we need to consider, but altogether will step by step really enhance the livability of downtown. That's shooting from the hip.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Jorick. I'd like to build from the last questioner to try to find a way to bridge your knowledge base with the needs here. And I think I am subject to it, you are too. We live in charismatic target cities. Rotterdam, Amsterdam for you, Vancouver for me. We have a problem with everyone wanting to come, place growth, multi-nodes, etc. We have luxuries that a city like Regina doesn't have. So I think you need to open up or thinking a little bit. I was here a lot 15 years ago preparing my Clifford Queens exhibition, so got to know the city quite well. Have not been in Regina for 15 years. So I'm going to throw out a couple of impressions to get dialogue going, which is mainly for the Reginans, not for you. But coming into the airport, there's a few things that really surprised me. Coming up Albert Street, I'm amazed that strip malls are still being built, as they are in this city. It's a dying urban form in most of North America, and it's disappearing. But I saw the newest, shiniest strip malls I see in London. Similarly, on the other edge of this square, there's a proposal for a stadium, hockey rink, etc., in one of the most beautiful urban spaces in the city. It strikes me what links these is both of them are yesterday's solutions. Strip malls, downtown stadium, you know what I mean? And I think low-growth cities go to old solutions, conservatism. And I have to tell you, I did some kind of Winnipeg a couple of months ago, that their hockey rink has not transformed the city. It's great on great game days, but it has not done it. So I guess my question back to you, we speak from positions of luxury in cities that people want, full of academic institutions, etc. How do we convince people that the old solutions don't work again? In other words, strip malls, downtown stadia, etc. They make it more interesting. How do we change the thinking?
So on Saturday I will show some photos. I started with this. I show some photos of Amsterdam in 1960, Utrecht in 1970. And then you'll see that the luxury that you're referring to is also only 50 years old. And so that is, as I mentioned, that these cities now are a result of choice 40 years ago. We are now literally at the moment in Utrecht, that's sort of the third city in the Netherlands. We are bringing canals back into the city center. So canals that were completely ditched with concrete in the 50s to make surface parking. We're now getting that concrete out again and letting the water flow again. So we're building quality back into the city center. So I think you're perfectly right about that luxury, but that is something that we've been working on for years, which and tells me that we can do it everywhere. So what I think is, what we need is more leadership. I think we need, to your point of being conservative, I think the key in a lot of these examples, we're now making car traffic in the entire core of Amsterdam, limiting that to 30 kilometers an hour. And so that's slow for a city of that scale. I mean, is that politically sensitive? Yes. I mean, does that cause protest? Yes. Is it the right thing to do? Yes. And so I think that's kind of leadership that we should seek from our politicians. But also again, to the point of AMS Institute, it also asks, I think, for a certain emancipation of the people that are working on these kind of things. I think we need also as a practice, as designers, but also as policy makers, I think we need to be more bold in how we envision, how we use scenarios to talk to the community, how we use storytelling to start building these stories. So I think we need to be more proactive, to be honest, and to be more daring and to be more bold about how we think about the future of a city. Because, I mean, the current status quo it's so easy to maintain it. But I don't see a reason to do that. And it's much more fun to make it better.
Great, maybe we have time for one or two more questions. Is that me?
Yeah, do you think we should think about rezoning?
Rezoning?
Yes.
Rezoning what into what?
You see, like, you talk about so many challenges about the OCE urban design.
Yeah.
But there's quite a lot of things about rezoning.
Yeah.
Do you think we should think about rezoning?
I think if you have a good vision and a good story and then a good project in that sequence, then you probably have to rezone on the level of a plot or of the entire city. I think in general, but I'm not familiar with the very specific context you're referring to, but I think a lot of cities could use a much more dynamic, responsive zoning that allows for much more mixed use. But I think it's not just zoning. I think we also need to be much more clever about, for example, something like an aesthetics committee. Do we have the right tools in our governance in place to make sure that the buildings that we're designing, the heritage that we have, is protected in the right way? I think there's a whole array of mechanisms that we can develop to, again, for the city to have more influence in discussions with developers, investors, with entrepreneurs. I think the right framework that allows for different uses, allows for lower parking norms, I mean, that will always help. But I think it's tough to start from zoning. I would rather start from the story and then fit the zoning in a clever way.
Okay, maybe one last question here.
So you mentioned Amsterdam, and this visioning started 50 some years ago, and these are obviously very long processes that take place. And we went through the pandemic, and that kind of threw everything upside down, right? And now cities are looking at repurposing office towers into residential space more out of necessity than specific urban planning. You've got these empty towers. The bonus is they need housing downtown. So how much has that thrown uncertainty into these urban strategies?
The pandemic, you mean?
Yeah, pandemic, curtain work from home. I mentioned mobility of work
Yeah.
before, people moving to, let's say, Idaho, so they can live in the mountains and telework to their office. How much has that affected these strategy sessions when it seems like there's so much more uncertainty in the world here?
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly, if there's more uncertainty. I think if you zoom out, I mean, if you go back 50, 100, 200 years, and you've always had these moments of big change and of political, societal change in a large scale. So I think that's part of the nature of our cities. I think you also see that sort of like cyclical process. At least I see it very often in Europe, of city centers being places of desire for a couple of decades, and then again it's sort of a wave into suburbia and then back into the city center. I think that's, if you zoom out, that's part of the story of cities. And I think, the pandemic, the COVID pandemic recently accelerated some of the trends that we saw already happening. We already saw online shopping behavior. We already saw that work was changing. And honestly, I only think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to more radically rethink the form of workplace, to more radically think about the power of neighborhoods and this idea of 15-minute districts. So I think I would say, let's leverage these kind of crises and also not make them an excuse, because there's, I'm not saying that you're doing, but in general, and I think there's always a next crisis that will keep us away from building a policy, and I think that policy should just be sustainable on itself and also give direction. And I think let's leverage these opportunities and work also with the market. I think what I saw in the Netherlands also, that it's also not bad now to have a bit of a financial crisis. If you look at property values, if you look at the behavior of private equity, sometimes it's also good to have a bit of a reset, rethink a bit where we're going, and build on that again. So yeah, for me that's part of the discourse.
These strategies discussions still have to happen, but this, if anything, should be a catalyst.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Jorick. Please join me in giving. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our session for this evening. I'd like to invite the SAA delegates to the hospitality suite in the Royal Suite here at the hotel, which will be open until midnight tonight. And if not, we will see you tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 7:30, and the program begins at 8:30. Thank you.